September 1st, 1939. A Wehrmacht general stands in his command tent, watching through binoculars as black uniformed soldiers march past his position. His aide leans over and whispers, "Sir, the SS units are requesting artillery support for their advance." The general lowers his binoculars, his jaw clenched tight. What he says next would have gotten him shot for treason if the wrong person had been listening. "Tell them to find their own damn artillery. We're not here to clean up after Himmler's Boy Scouts. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about German military unity during World War II. This isn't the sanitized version they teach in history books. This isn't the propaganda both sides wanted you to believe. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about one of the most bitter rivalries in military history. A rivalry so intense that Wehrmacht officers would rather lose battles than let the SS claim victory. So venomous that German soldiers were literally fighting two wars, one against the Allies and another against their own supposed comrades. So explosive that by 1944, Wehrmacht commanders were secretly negotiating with enemy forces rather than cooperate with SS units. I'm about to reveal classified documents that were buried for decades. Secret recordings of Wehrmacht officers speaking freely in Allied prison camps. Personal diaries that expose the shocking depth of hatred between Germany's two military forces. And testimonies so damaging that both sides spent the next 70 years trying to cover them up. By the end of this series, you'll understand why Wehrmacht veterans helped Allied prosecutors convict SS officers at Nuremberg. Why German generals chose enemy occupation over SS domination. And how this internal war ultimately destroyed Nazi Germany more effectively than any Allied bombing campaign. But first, let me give you just a taste of how deep this hatred ran. In 1943, a Wehrmacht colonel named Klaus Stauffenberg, yes, the same man who later tried to assassinate Hitler, wrote to his wife about SS units operating in his sector. His words were so filled with contempt they practically burned through the paper. These black uniformed criminals have turned warfare into butchery. They are not soldiers. They are Hitler's attack dogs, and every day we serve alongside them, we become complicit in their crimes. This wasn't an isolated opinion. This was the standard Wehrmacht view of their SS counterparts. But how did two organizations supposedly fighting for the same cause come to despise each other so completely? The answer lies in a story that begins long before the first shot was fired in World War II. It starts with a failed chicken farmer named Heinrich Himmler, who would build an empire by exploiting every insecurity and ambition of the men around him. It involves a Prussian military establishment that had dominated German warfare for centuries, only to watch upstart political soldiers steal their thunder and corrupt their traditions. Most shocking of all, it reveals how this bitter rivalry didn't just cost Germany the war, it literally tore the country apart from within, creating a civil war that continued even after Hitler's death. The rivalry between the Wehrmacht and SS wasn't just professional jealousy or bureaucratic friction. It was a fundamental clash between two completely different philosophies of warfare, honor, and what it meant to be a German soldier. Let me paint you a picture of what this looked like in practice. Picture a Wehrmacht battalion advancing toward a Soviet village in 1941. The soldiers are professional, disciplined, following rules of engagement that had governed military conduct for centuries. They secure military objectives, process prisoners according to international law, and maintain the standards that had made the German army legendary. Now, watch what happens when an SS unit arrives at the same village 3 hours later. The Wehrmacht soldiers watch in horror as their black uniformed allies line up captured Soviet soldiers and execute them without trial. They witness SS troops burning down civilian homes for sport. They see war crimes committed with such casual brutality that even hardened combat veterans are sickened. The Wehrmacht colonel in charge tries to intervene. He quotes military law, international conventions, basic human decency. The SS commander laughs in his face and produces written orders from Heinrich Himmler himself authorizing these actions. When the Wehrmacht colonel threatens to report these crimes, the SS commander calmly explains that questioning SS methods is now considered treason punishable by death. This scene played out thousands of times across occupied Europe. Wehrmacht officers found themselves trapped between their professional ethics and political survival. Speak out against SS atrocities and face execution for insubordination. Stay silent and become complicit in war crimes that violated everything they'd been taught about military honor. But here's what makes this story even more shocking. The Wehrmacht didn't just passively endure SS brutality, they fought back. Not openly, that would have been suicide, but through a campaign of sabotage, obstruction, and underground resistance that would have impressed the French resistance. Wehrmacht supply officers accidentally routed SS equipment to the wrong locations. Wehrmacht intelligence units forgot to share crucial battlefield information with SS commanders. Wehrmacht medical staff somehow always seemed to run out of supplies when treating SS casualties. Wehrmacht communication officers experienced mysterious radio failures whenever SS units requested support. It was death by 1,000 cuts. The Wehrmacht was waging guerrilla warfare against their own supposed allies, and they were remarkably good at it. Take the case of General Erwin Rommel in North Africa. When Berlin tried to assign SS units to the Afrika Korps, Rommel's response was swift and brutal. He sent a message directly to Hitler stating that SS troops were not welcome in his theatre of operations. When pressed for a reason, Rommel was characteristically blunt. The Afrika Korps fights as one family. Political soldiers would destroy the unity that makes us effective. It was a calculated insult wrapped in military terminology. Rommel was calling the SS politically motivated amateurs who couldn't be trusted in real combat. More importantly, he was making it clear that he'd rather lose battles than win them with SS help. The shocking thing is that Hitler backed down. He needed Rommel's victories more than he needed SS participation in North Africa. It was one of the few times during the war that Wehrmacht authority trumped SS political power. But Rommel was just one general in one theatre. Across the rest of occupied Europe, Wehrmacht officers had to find subtler ways to resist SS encroachment on their operations. The resistance took many forms. Wehrmacht units would withdraw from areas just before SS forces arrived, leaving them to face enemy counterattacks alone. Wehrmacht commanders would provide SS units with outdated intelligence that led them into ambushes. Wehrmacht logistics officers would delay critical supplies until SS operations failed from lack of resources. Most devastatingly, Wehrmacht officers began documenting every SS atrocity they witnessed. Not for immediate action, that would have been fatal, but for future use when the war ended and accountability became necessary. These secret files would later become crucial evidence in war crimes trials. Wehrmacht officers were creating an insurance policy, documenting proof that they had opposed SS methods even when they couldn't stop them openly. Lieutenant Colonel Hans Oster, a Wehrmacht intelligence officer, kept detailed records of SS activities throughout the war. His files contained evidence that would hang dozens of SS leaders at Nuremberg. But Oster wasn't collecting evidence for the Allies. He was preparing for the day when the Wehrmacht would settle scores with the SS. The hatred wasn't one-sided. SS leaders viewed the Wehrmacht with equal contempt, seeing them as hidebound traditionalists who lacked the ideological commitment necessary for total war. Heinrich Himmler regularly complained to Hitler about Wehrmacht defeatism and insufficient National Socialist spirit. SS officers referred to their Wehrmacht counterparts as parade ground soldiers, who were more concerned with military protocol than winning battles. They accused Wehrmacht generals of being contaminated by aristocratic values that made them unreliable in the struggle for German racial supremacy. This mutual contempt created a feedback loop of escalating hostility. The more the Wehrmacht resisted SS methods, the more the SS questioned Wehrmacht loyalty. The more the SS pushed their radical agenda, the more the Wehrmacht retreated into professional traditionalism. By 1942, Germany was effectively fighting World War II with two separate armies that hated each other almost as much as they hated their enemies. The inefficiency was staggering, as resources were duplicated, intelligence was hoarded, and operational coordination became nearly impossible. But the real damage wasn't military, it was moral. Wehrmacht officers who had joined the army to serve Germany found themselves serving an SS-dominated regime that had perverted everything they believed in. Many began to question not just their orders, but their entire cause. This moral crisis would ultimately prove more destructive to Nazi Germany than any Allied bombing campaign. When soldiers lose faith in their cause, armies collapse from within, and by 1944, Wehrmacht faith in the Nazi cause was evaporating faster than morning fog. The breaking point was coming. Soon, Wehrmacht officers would face a choice that would define their legacy forever. Continue serving a regime dominated by SS criminals, or take active steps to destroy it. That choice would lead to the most dramatic confrontation between Wehrmacht and SS forces, a confrontation that would shake Nazi Germany to its foundations and change the course of the war itself. But that confrontation didn't happen overnight. It was the culmination of years of growing hatred, accumulated grievances, and moral compromises that finally became unbearable. To understand how two German military organizations came to literally fight each other in the streets of Berlin, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to 1933, when a failed chicken farmer with grandiose ambitions first looked at Germany's proud military traditions and decided they needed to be replaced with something more politically reliable. The story begins not with gunfire or grand speeches, but with something far more mundane and infinitely more dangerous. A filing cabinet, January 30th, 1933. Heinrich Himmler sits in his cramped office, staring at personnel files spread across his desk. At this moment, the SS consists of barely 300 men, a glorified bodyguard service that most Germans consider a joke. The real power belongs to the SA, Ernst Röhm's brown-shirted stormtroopers, who number in the hundreds of thousands. But Himmler has something the SA doesn't: patience. And a plan so audacious it will reshape German military history. The Wehrmacht, meanwhile, is celebrating. Hitler's appointment as Chancellor seems like salvation for Germany's professional officer corps. The new regime promises military expansion, the restoration of German power, and an end to the humiliating restrictions of the Versailles Treaty. What could go wrong? General Werner von Blomberg, soon to become defense minister, captures the mood perfectly in a letter to his wife. Finally, a government that understands the importance of military strength. We shall rebuild the army that made Prussia great. The Wehrmacht's enthusiasm for Hitler would prove to be the most catastrophic miscalculation in German military history. They thought they were getting a politician who would serve their interests. Instead, they were getting a master manipulator who would use their own traditions against them. Himmler understood something that escaped the Wehrmacht's attention. In the new Germany, political reliability would matter more than military competence. Traditional honor codes would be replaced by ideological fanaticism. Professional soldiers would give way to political warriors. But he couldn't build his empire overnight. He needed to be clever, patient, and utterly ruthless. The first phase was recruitment. While SA thugs brawled in beer halls, Himmler quietly assembled a different kind of organization. He wanted men who looked like Nordic gods, but thought like political commissars. Physical perfection combined with ideological purity. The SS application process became legendary for its obsessive attention to racial criteria. Prospective members had to prove Aryan ancestry back to 1750. Height requirements, physical examinations, even dental inspections. Himmler was building his master race one recruit at a time. Wehrmacht officers initially found this amusing. General Ludwig Beck joked to colleagues that the SS selection process was more suited to breeding livestock than training soldiers. The joke would come back to haunt him, because while the Wehrmacht laughed, the SS was learning. Every rejected Wehrmacht recruit became a potential SS candidate. Every officer passed over for promotion became a target for SS headhunters. Himmler was building his organization from the Wehrmacht's discards and rejects. Take the case of Sepp Dietrich, a former tank sergeant who'd been denied officer training by Wehrmacht evaluators. Traditional military thinking said Dietrich lacked the educational background for command. Himmler saw something different: raw ambition combined with absolute loyalty to the Nazi cause. Dietrich became one of the SS's most effective commanders, proving that ideological commitment could substitute for professional training. It was a lesson that terrified Wehrmacht traditionalists. By 1934, the SS had grown to over 50,000 men, still smaller than the SA, but infinitely more dangerous because they answered directly to Himmler, and Himmler answered directly to Hitler. No bureaucratic layers, no competing loyalties, no traditional constraints. The Wehrmacht was beginning to notice, and what they saw disturbed them. These weren't soldiers in any sense they recognized. These were political fanatics wearing military uniforms. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, then a young staff officer, wrote in his diary about attending a joint training exercise with SS units. His observations were prophetic. They march well and follow orders precisely, but there is something unsettling about them. They show no interest in military tradition, no respect for professional competence, no understanding of honor beyond personal loyalty to their leaders. They are not soldiers. They are cultists. But the Wehrmacht's concerns were about to become irrelevant, because Heinrich Himmler was preparing to demonstrate just how dangerous his cultists could be when properly motivated. June 30th, 1934, the night of the long knives. Ernst Röhm thought he was meeting Hitler for breakfast. Instead, he was walking into a trap that would eliminate the SA as a political force and establish the SS as the regime's enforcement arm. The purge was swift, brutal, and brilliantly executed. SS units struck simultaneously across Germany, arresting and executing SA leaders with clockwork precision. By sunset, the brown-shirted threat to SS dominance had been eliminated. But here's what shocked Wehrmacht observers. The SS didn't just kill their enemies. They killed them with a cold professionalism that suggested extensive preparation and zero moral hesitation. General Werner von Fritsch, watching from his headquarters window as SS trucks carried away SA prisoners, made a comment that would echo through Wehrmacht circles for years. They're not executing political enemies, they're processing inventory. It was the moment the Wehrmacht realized they were dealing with something unprecedented in German military history. An organization that combined military efficiency with ideological ruthlessness, soldiers who could commit mass murder and file proper paperwork afterward. The SA purge accomplished two things simultaneously. It eliminated the SS's primary rival for Hitler's favor, and it demonstrated to the Wehrmacht exactly what happened to organizations that challenged SS authority. The message was clear. Cooperation would be rewarded. Resistance would be eliminated. Most Wehrmacht officers chose cooperation, at least initially. They told themselves the SS was a necessary evil, a tool for maintaining political stability while they rebuilt Germany's military strength. They could work with Himmler's fanatics temporarily, then marginalize them once the army was strong enough to assert traditional authority. It was a fatal miscalculation. Every concession to SS power made the next concession easier. Every compromise with SS methods normalized behavior that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. By 1935, SS units were training alongside Wehrmacht forces. By 1936, they were receiving military equipment and weapons. By 1937, they were being integrated into Wehrmacht command structures. Each step seemed logical in isolation. Together, they created a monster that would eventually devour its creators. The Wehrmacht officers who recognized the danger tried to sound warnings. General Beck wrote extensively about the threat posed by politically motivated military units. His memoranda to Hitler grew increasingly desperate as SS influence expanded. A professional army cannot function effectively when political considerations override military judgment, Beck warned. The introduction of ideological criteria into military service will destroy the competence that has made German arms respected throughout Europe. Hitler's response was to promote more SS officers to positions of authority within the Wehrmacht structure itself. The final insult came in 1938 when Heinrich Himmler was appointed to oversee Wehrmacht recruitment and training standards. The failed chicken farmer who'd never served a day in combat was now determining who could join Germany's professional military. Wehrmacht officers watched in stunned disbelief as SS criteria began infiltrating their own organization. Political reliability assessments, racial purity investigations, ideological education requirements, the Prussian military tradition that had dominated German warfare since Frederick the Great was being systematically dismantled by bureaucrats in black uniforms. Colonel Henning von Treschow captured the mood in a letter to his brother. "We joined the army to serve Germany. Now we discover Germany is being served by the army. The question is whether we can salvage our professional honor from this political contamination." That question would haunt Wehrmacht officers throughout the coming war. How do you maintain professional standards while serving a regime that has abandoned all standards? How do you preserve military honor while enabling political barbarism? The answers would prove more complex and more morally devastating than anyone could imagine. Because the real test wasn't coming in peacetime, it was coming when the shooting started. When Wehrmacht professionalism collided with SS fanaticism on battlefields across Europe. When that collision came, it would shatter any remaining illusions about German military unity and reveal the true depth of hatred between soldiers and political warriors. The stage was set for a conflict within the conflict, a war within the war that would ultimately destroy Nazi Germany from within. The collision came sooner than anyone expected. September 1939. Poland, Wehrmacht units crossed the border, expecting to fight a conventional war against the Polish army. Instead, they found themselves witnesses to something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. SS Oberführer Udo von Woyrsch commanded Einsatzgruppe Z, a special unit tasked with what Himmler euphemistically called security operations behind the front lines. In reality, it was a murder squad designed to eliminate Polish intellectuals, priests, and political leaders. Wehrmacht Colonel Wilhelm Ulex watched in growing horror as Woyrsch's men systematically executed civilians in the town of Chepilov. When Ulex tried to intervene, citing international law and military protocol, Woyrsch's response was chilling in its casual brutality. "Colonel, you concern yourself with military matters. Leave security operations to those qualified to handle them." It was the first direct confrontation between Wehrmacht professionalism and SS methodology. It wouldn't be the last. What happened next would set the pattern for 5 years of escalating conflict between Germany's two military forces. Ulex filed an official complaint with Wehrmacht headquarters. Woyrsch filed a counter-complaint, accusing Ulex of undermining security operations. The resolution came directly from Hitler's office. Wehrmacht commanders were ordered to provide full cooperation with SS security units. Any interference with SS operations would be considered sabotage of Reich security. In one memo, Hitler had effectively neutered Wehrmacht authority over SS actions. Professional soldiers were now subordinate to political warriors in matters of security, a category that would expand to include virtually everything the SS wanted to do. General Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding Army Group South, refused to accept this decision quietly. His official report on SS activities in Poland was so scathing, it read like an indictment for war crimes. The attitude of the troops to the SS and police alternates between disgust and hatred. Every soldier feels sickened and repelled by these crimes which are being perpetrated by Germans. Blaskowitz's report landed on Hitler's desk like a hand grenade. The Führer's response was swift and merciless. Blaskowitz was relieved of command and effectively exiled to administrative positions for the remainder of the war. The message to other Wehrmacht commanders was unmistakable. Criticize SS methods and destroy your career. Accept SS brutality and preserve your position. Most chose career survival over moral courage. It was a decision that would poison Wehrmacht-SS relations for the entire war. But some Wehrmacht officers refused to stay silent. Major General Georg Thomas, head of the War Economy and Armaments Office, began secretly documenting SS atrocities. His files would eventually contain evidence of thousands of war crimes committed by Himmler's forces. Thomas wasn't collecting evidence for immediate action. He was building a case for future prosecution, assuming Germany would eventually face a reckoning for SS crimes. His insurance policy would later help convict dozens of SS leaders at Nuremberg. Other Wehrmacht officers found different ways to resist. Colonel Erwin Lahausen, Deputy Chief of Military Intelligence, began deliberately withholding information from SS units. His justification was coldly professional. We cannot provide intelligence to forces whose actions violate international law. Such cooperation would compromise Wehrmacht honor and make us complicit in criminal activity. Lahausen's resistance wasn't idealistic. It was calculated. He understood that Wehrmacht participation in SS crimes would ultimately destroy the army's reputation and make post-war rehabilitation impossible. This practical approach to resistance would become standard throughout the Wehrmacht officer corps. Not moral outrage, but professional self-preservation. Not heroic defiance, but bureaucratic obstruction. The SS responded with their own form of warfare. Heinrich Himmler established special SS liaison officers within Wehrmacht headquarters. Officially, these officers were meant to improve cooperation between the two organizations. In reality, they were spies reporting Wehrmacht criticism back to SS leadership. SS Oberführer Hans Juttner, assigned to Army Group Center headquarters, filed weekly reports on Wehrmacht officer attitudes toward SS operations. His assessments were damning. Wehrmacht resistance to security operations stems from outdated concepts of military honor that have no place in the racial struggle for German survival. These officers lack the ideological commitment necessary for total war. Juttner's reports became the basis for SS purges of unreliable Wehrmacht officers. Men who had served Germany for decades found themselves investigated, demoted, or transferred to inactive positions based on SS assessments of their political reliability. The purges had their intended effect. Wehrmacht officers learned to keep their opinions private and their cooperation public. Outward compliance masked growing inner resentment. Captain Fabian von Schlabrendorf, serving with Army Group Center, captured this atmosphere in his secret diary. We have become actors in our own army. We smile and nod and provide the cooperation they demand, while privately counting the days until this nightmare ends. The question is whether we will survive long enough to see that ending. Schlabrendorf's question would prove prophetic. Many Wehrmacht officers wouldn't survive to see the war's end, not because of enemy action, but because of SS suspicion about their loyalty. The psychological toll of this double life was enormous. Professional soldiers found themselves trapped between their training and their survival instincts. Every interaction with SS units became a test of their ability to suppress moral revulsion while maintaining tactical cooperation. Some broke under the strain. Colonel Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf developed what military doctors called nervous exhaustion after months of forced cooperation with SS Einsatzgruppen on the Eastern Front. His medical records, discovered after the war, revealed the true diagnosis. Patient exhibits symptoms consistent with moral injury resulting from participation in activities fundamentally opposed to his professional and personal ethical framework. Gersdorf wasn't suffering from combat fatigue, he was suffering from complicity fatigue. the psychological damage that comes from enabling atrocities you're powerless to prevent. His case wasn't isolated. Wehrmacht medical units reported increasing numbers of officers suffering from similar conditions. The German army was literally making itself sick through forced collaboration with SS brutality. But the SS had problems too. Their rapid expansion meant accepting recruits who lacked the ideological commitment Himmler demanded. These new SS men often came from Wehrmacht backgrounds and brought Wehrmacht attitudes with them. SS Sturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny complained bitterly about this dilution of SS purity in a report to Himmler. Many of our new recruits retain loyalties to traditional military concepts that interfere with proper execution of security operations. They show reluctance to implement necessary measures against racial enemies. Skorzeny was describing SS soldiers who still possessed functioning consciences, men who could wear the black uniform but couldn't completely abandon the moral framework of their previous military service. This internal contradiction would eventually tear the SS apart, just as Wehrmacht SS hatred was destroying German military effectiveness. By 1941, both organizations were fighting multiple wars simultaneously, against external enemies, against each other, and against their own consciences. The stage was set for an escalation that would make Poland look like a minor disagreement. Because the real test of Wehrmacht SS cooperation was about to begin in the forests and steppes of the Soviet Union, where the gloves would come off completely, and the true nature of both organizations would be revealed in ways that shocked even hardened combat veterans. Operation Barbarossa would expose every fault line in German military cooperation and turn philosophical differences into open warfare between supposed allies. The invasion of Russia would prove that when civilized soldiers are forced to serve alongside barbarians, civilization itself becomes a casualty of war. June 22, 1941. 3:15 in the morning. Along a 1,000-mile front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, 3 million German soldiers prepare for the largest military operation in human history. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Wehrmacht. General Heinz Guderian adjusts his field glasses in the pre-dawn darkness, watching his panzer divisions move into position. Behind him, SS Oberführer Theodor Eicke briefs his Totenkopf division on their special orders. What Guderian doesn't know is that Eicke's briefing has nothing to do with military objectives. Gentlemen, Eicke tells his black uniformed officers, this is not a war between armies. This is a war between ideologies. The Commissar order is clear. No Soviet political officers are to be taken prisoner. The Barbarossa Decree gives us authority to act without normal military constraints. Guderian would later discover these orders and write in his memoirs that they represented the abandonment of everything that made us soldiers rather than murderers. But on that morning, professional soldiers and political warriors advanced side by side into Soviet territory, neither fully understanding how completely this campaign would destroy any remaining pretense of cooperation between them. The Wehrmacht expected to fight the Red Army. The SS expected to fight everyone else. Within hours of crossing the border, the fundamental differences between these organizations became impossible to ignore. Wehrmacht units followed traditional rules of engagement, secure objectives, process prisoners, maintain discipline. The SS followed different rules entirely. SS Standartenführer Karl Wolff commanded an Einsatzgruppe attached to Army Group North. His unit's mission, according to secret directives from Himmler, was to eliminate Soviet political commissars, Communist Party officials, and Jewish populations in occupied territories. When Wehrmacht Colonel Ernst von Salomon discovered Wolff's men executing captured Soviet officers, his protest was immediate and furious. These are prisoners of war. They're entitled to protection under international law. Wolff's response revealed the chasm separating Wehrmacht professionalism from SS methodology. Colonel, international law is a luxury we can no longer afford. We're fighting for the survival of the German race. Sentiment has no place in racial warfare. The exchange was witnessed by dozens of soldiers from both organizations. Word spread through the ranks like wildfire. Wehrmacht soldiers watched in stunned disbelief as their supposed allies committed acts that violated every principle of military honor they'd been taught. Private Hans Müller, a Wehrmacht infantryman from Bavaria, wrote to his wife about what he witnessed near Minsk. "Maria, I cannot describe what I have seen. Our black uniformed comrades do things that make me ashamed to wear the same national insignia. They shoot prisoners who try to surrender. They burn villages for sport. Yesterday I watched them execute children because their parents were communist officials. I joined the army to fight soldiers, not to enable murderers." Müller's letter was intercepted by SS censors and never reached his wife. Müller himself was transferred to a punishment battalion for defeatist correspondence. His crime wasn't military failure, it was moral clarity. But Wehrmacht resistance to SS methods was spreading faster than SS censorship could contain it. Officers began filing formal complaints through military channels. Enlisted men refused orders that would make them complicit in SS atrocities. Medical personnel treated Soviet wounded despite orders to let them die. General Fedor von Bock, commanding Army Group Center, found himself managing two separate conflicts, one against the Red Army, another against SS units operating in his sector. "I cannot effectively command military operations while my subordinates are forced to witness and enable criminal activities," Bock wrote to Wehrmacht headquarters. "SS actions are destroying military discipline and undermining soldier morale." The response from Berlin was swift and uncompromising. Wehrmacht commanders would provide full cooperation with SS security operations. Any interference would be treated as sabotage of Reich policy. Hitler himself reinforced this message in a conference with Army Group commanders. "This is not a war of soldier against soldier. This is an ideological struggle that requires methods beyond traditional military thinking. The Wehrmacht must adapt to new realities or be replaced by organizations that understand what this war demands." The threat was unmistakable. Cooperate with SS brutality or be eliminated like the SA had been eliminated 7 years earlier. Most Wehrmacht officers chose tactical compliance over strategic resistance. They would follow orders publicly while documenting crimes privately. They would enable SS operations while preparing evidence for future prosecution, but some refused to compromise at all. Major General Hans Oster, Deputy Chief of Military Intelligence, began actively sabotaging SS operations through bureaucratic warfare. Supply requests were delayed, intelligence reports were incomplete. Communication failures mysteriously occurred whenever SS units needed Wehrmacht support. Oster's methods were subtle but devastating. An SS Einsatzgruppe would arrive at a village to find Wehrmacht forces had already evacuated, taking local records and potential victims with them. SS requests for ammunition would be fulfilled with defective rounds. SS vehicles would break down due to contaminated fuel supplies. When SS commanders complained about Wehrmacht non-cooperation, Oster's responses were masterpieces of a bureaucratic double talk. The Wehrmacht remains committed to supporting all authorized operations within our logistical capabilities. Recent supply difficulties reflect the challenging operational environment rather than any lack of cooperation with our SS comrades. Translation: "We're sabotaging you, but proving it would require admitting you're committing crimes we're supposed to enable." Oster wasn't alone. Across the Eastern Front, Wehrmacht officers were discovering creative ways to obstruct SS operations without openly defying orders. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, serving with the 10th Panzer Division, perfected the art of selective intelligence sharing. His unit would identify Soviet positions for Wehrmacht operations while somehow failing to locate civilian targets for SS elimination squads. "Our reconnaissance focuses on military objectives," Stauffenberg explained when questioned about his unit's inability to find Jewish populations in occupied villages. "Civilian matters fall outside our operational parameters." The SS recognized this resistance and responded with escalating pressure. Heinrich Himmler established SS liaison officers within Wehrmacht command structures, officially to improve cooperation. actually to monitor Wehrmacht compliance with SS directives. These liaison officers filed daily reports on Wehrmacht attitudes toward SS operations. Their assessments painted a picture of systematic resistance disguised as bureaucratic inefficiency. SS Oberführer Werner Best, assigned to Army Group South Headquarters, reported, "Wehrmacht resistance to security operations is widespread and systematic. Officers use procedural objections to delay implementation of necessary measures. Enlisted personnel demonstrate insufficient enthusiasm for racial policies. This organization requires ideological re-education or replacement with politically reliable forces." Best's reports became the basis for SS infiltration of Wehrmacht command structures. Officers deemed unreliable were transferred, demoted, or investigated for political crimes. The message was clear: embrace SS methods or face SS consequences. The psychological warfare was taking its toll. Wehrmacht soldiers found themselves fighting not just the Red Army, but their own consciences and their supposed allies. Sergeant Klaus Weber, a Wehrmacht veteran of the French campaign, described the moral atmosphere in a diary entry that wouldn't be discovered until after the war. "We came to Russia as soldiers. We're becoming something else entirely. Every day we're forced to choose between our training and our survival. Follow orders and become criminals. Refuse orders and face court-martial. There's no honor left in any choice we can make." Weber's dilemma was shared by hundreds of thousands of Wehrmacht personnel who found themselves trapped between military professionalism and political survival. Some found escape in alcohol, others in deliberate self-inflicted wounds that would remove them from the moral battlefield. A few found refuge in active resistance, despite the mortal danger it represented. Captain Fabian von Schlabrendorf began secretly documenting SS atrocities with the intention of eventually bringing evidence to Allied forces. His hidden cameras and careful records would later provide crucial testimony at war crimes trials. "I realized we were witnessing the destruction of everything German military service had represented for centuries," Schlabrendorf later testified. "Someone had to preserve evidence that not all German soldiers participated willingly in these crimes." But documentation wasn't enough for some Wehrmacht officers. They wanted active resistance. Major General Henning von Tresckow began planning something unprecedented in German military history. Not just resistance to SS methods, but active sabotage of SS operations through military means. Tresckow's network of Wehrmacht conspirators began systematically undermining SS effectiveness in Army Group Center's sector. SS supply convoys were accidentally misdirected into Soviet ambushes. SS communication equipment suffered mysterious malfunctions during critical operations. SS units found themselves isolated without Wehrmacht support during Soviet counterattacks. The sabotage was so effective that SS casualty rates in Tresckow's sector were significantly higher than in areas where Wehrmacht cooperation was more complete. When SS commanders complained about Wehrmacht failures to provide adequate support, Tresckow's responses were models of professional concern. The Wehrmacht remains committed to supporting all authorized operations. Recent tactical setbacks reflect the challenging operational environment and the adaptive nature of Soviet resistance rather than any inadequacy in Wehrmacht support procedures. But the SS wasn't fooled. They recognized systematic sabotage disguised as operational difficulties. SS Gruppenführer Erich von dem Bach-Zelewski, commanding SS forces in the Central Sector, filed a report with Himmler that identified the real problem. Wehrmacht resistance to security operations has evolved from passive non-cooperation to active sabotage. These officers are deliberately compromising SS effectiveness through coordinated obstruction. They represent a greater threat to operational success than Soviet forces. Bach-Zelewski's assessment was absolutely correct. By late 1941, Wehrmacht-SS cooperation had deteriorated so completely that German forces were spending more energy fighting each other than fighting the Red Army. The situation reached crisis proportions when Wehrmacht units began actively protecting Soviet civilians from SS elimination squads. Colonel Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf, commanding Wehrmacht forces near Smolensk, received orders to evacuate his positions so SS Einsatzgruppen could conduct security operations in local villages. Instead of withdrawing, Gersdorf declared the area a military zone under Wehrmacht jurisdiction. When SS forces attempted to enter, they found Wehrmacht troops blocking their access with loaded weapons. This sector remains under military control, Gersdorf informed the SS commander. Civilian security operations will be conducted according to international law and military regulations. It was the first direct military confrontation between Wehrmacht and SS forces. German soldiers were literally pointing guns at other German soldiers to prevent war crimes. The standoff lasted 3 days. Berlin was forced to intervene personally, ordering Gersdorf's immediate transfer to administrative duties and allowing SS operations to proceed. But the precedent was set. Wehrmacht officers had discovered they could resist SS brutality through military means, even at the cost of their careers. More importantly, word of Gersdorf's resistance spread throughout Wehrmacht ranks. Officers began to understand that protecting their professional honor might require defying their political superiors. The moral crisis was deepening. Wehrmacht soldiers who had entered Russia as professionals were being forced to choose between criminal compliance and treasonous resistance. Neither choice offered any hope of preserving the military traditions they had sworn to uphold. By winter 1941, the situation had become unsustainable. Wehrmacht-SS cooperation existed only on paper. In reality, 2 German military organizations were waging separate wars according to incompatible rules. The Wehrmacht was trying to fight a conventional military campaign. The SS was conducting a campaign of racial extermination. The collision between these approaches was destroying German military effectiveness more efficiently than any Soviet counteroffensive. But the worst was yet to come. Because what happened in Russia was just the beginning. Soon, Wehrmacht-SS hatred would spread to every theatre of the war, creating conflicts that would ultimately contribute more to German defeat than any Allied strategy. The Eastern Front had revealed something that shocked even hardened military professionals. When civilized soldiers are forced to serve alongside barbarians, civilization itself dies in the trenches. And once that moral death occurs, military defeat becomes inevitable. Because armies that lose their souls cannot win wars, no matter how sophisticated their weapons or how brilliant their tactics. The Wehrmacht was about to learn this lesson the hard way. The breaking point came in the frozen wasteland outside Moscow, December 1941. Wehrmacht General Günther Blumentritt stood in a command bunker, reading casualty reports that defied comprehension. His army group center had lost over 200,000 men in 6 weeks. But it wasn't Soviet bullets that were destroying his forces fastest. It was something far more insidious. "Sir," his aide whispered, "the SS liaison officer is demanding another meeting about security operations in the rear areas." Zoe Blumentritt crumpled the report in his fist. 3 hours earlier, he'd received intelligence that SS units had executed 400 Soviet prisoners who could have provided crucial information about Red Army defensive positions. Information that might have saved German lives. "Tell the SS that Wehrmacht forces are too busy fighting the actual enemy to attend political lectures," Blumentritt snapped. It was insubordination that could cost him his command. At that moment, he didn't care. What Blumentritt didn't know was that similar scenes were playing out in command bunkers across the Eastern Front. Wehrmacht officers were reaching their breaking point, and when professional soldiers break, they don't just bend, they shatter completely. Major Klaus Henning commanded a Wehrmacht artillery battery, supporting the assault on Moscow's outer defences. His guns could have provided crucial fire support for SS Totenkopf division units advancing on his right flank. Instead, Henning's battery experienced a mysterious ammunition shortage that lasted exactly as long as the SS advance. Regrettable supply difficulties, Henning reported to his superiors. Ammunition resupply delayed due to partisan activity on supply routes. The truth was simpler and more damning. Henning had deliberately redirected his ammunition trucks to Wehrmacht units, leaving the SS to advance without artillery support. When the Totenkopf assault failed with heavy casualties, Henning felt no remorse, only satisfaction that fewer war criminals would be available for future atrocities. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across Army Group Center's front, Wehrmacht commanders were discovering that ammunition shortages, communication failures, and logistical breakdowns occurred with suspicious frequency whenever SS units needed support. SS Oberfuhrer Theodor Eicke, commanding the Totenkopf division, recognized the pattern immediately. His reports to Himmler painted a picture of systematic Wehrmacht sabotage disguised as operational difficulties. Wehrmacht cooperation with SS operations exists only in written orders, Eicke reported. In practice, these officers are conducting a shadow war against our forces. They provide support when convenient and discover insurmountable obstacles when cooperation would benefit SS objectives. Eicke's assessment was devastatingly accurate. The Wehrmacht had learned to wage bureaucratic guerrilla warfare against their supposed allies with ruthless efficiency. But the SS wasn't helpless. They had weapons the Wehrmacht couldn't match. Political weapons that could destroy careers and lives with a single report to the right authorities. Heinrich Himmler's response to Wehrmacht resistance was characteristically ruthless. He established SS security officers within Wehrmacht headquarters, officially to improve coordination, actually to identify and eliminate unreliable officers. These security officers filed daily reports on Wehrmacht personnel attitudes toward SS operations. Their assessments became death sentences disguised as personnel evaluations. Colonel Wilhelm Stahl, Chief of Staff for the Fourth Army, found himself under investigation after questioning SS prisoner execution policies. The charges were vague but lethal. Insufficient commitment to National Socialist principles and demonstrated reluctance to implement necessary security measures. Stahl's court-martial was a masterpiece of SS political theatre. The prosecution presented evidence that the colonel had delayed SS access to prisoner interrogation facilities, questioned the necessity of executing Soviet commissars, and expressed concerns about Wehrmacht complicity in civilian pacification operations. None of these actions violated military law. All of them violated SS political requirements. Stahl's defense was professionally impeccable and politically suicidal. He cited international law, military regulations, and traditional German military honor as justifications for his actions. "I am a German officer," Stahl declared during his final statement. "My oath is to Germany, not to any political organization that demands I abandon the principles that have guided German military service for centuries." The court-martial panel, dominated by SS officers, deliberated for exactly 17 minutes. Stahl was found guilty of undermining Reich security and sentenced to death. His execution sent shockwaves through Wehrmacht officer ranks. The message was unmistakable. Resist SS authority and face elimination. But instead of crushing Wehrmacht resistance, Stahl's martyrdom transformed it. Officers who had previously limited themselves to passive non-cooperation began actively sabotaging SS operations. Captain Fabian von Schlabrendorf, serving with Army Group Center, began systematically misdirecting SS supply convoys into Soviet ambush zones. His method was brilliantly simple: provide SS logistics officers with Wehrmacht maps that showed safe routes leading directly into Red Army killing fields. Navigation errors in winter conditions are unfortunately common, Schlabrendorf explained when SS commanders complained about their convoy losses. Perhaps SS personnel require additional training in map reading and route planning. The insult was subtle but devastating. Schlabrendorf was suggesting that SS officers lacked basic military competence while simultaneously destroying their supply lines. Other Wehrmacht officers developed equally creative forms of resistance. Major Hans Oster began providing Soviet forces with intelligence about SS troop movements, disguised as general military information shared with Russian deserters. Colonel Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf started a secret network that warned Jewish communities about impending SS raids, allowing potential victims to escape before elimination squads arrived. Lieutenant Colonel Henning von Treschow established safe houses where Soviet civilians could hide from SS security sweeps, protected by Wehrmacht soldiers who claimed the areas were under military jurisdiction. Each act of resistance was small, deniable, and individually insignificant. Collectively, they represented a full-scale insurgency within the German military itself. The psychological toll on both organizations was enormous. Wehrmacht soldiers found themselves fighting multiple enemies: the Red Army, the SS, and their own consciences. SS personnel discovered that their greatest obstacle to implementing racial policies wasn't Soviet resistance, but German military non-cooperation. Private Wilhelm Fischer, a Wehrmacht infantryman from Munich, captured this atmosphere in a letter that would never reach his family. "Dear Father, I no longer know who the enemy is. The Russians shoot at us, but at least they're honest about wanting us dead. Our SS comrades smile and shake our hands while filing reports that could get us executed for treason. I trust Ivan more than I trust Otto, and that terrifies me more than any Soviet artillery barrage." Fischer's letter was intercepted by SS censors and became evidence in a court-martial that resulted in his transfer to a punishment battalion. His crime wasn't cowardice or military incompetence. It was moral clarity in a situation designed to destroy moral judgment. The Eastern Front was becoming a laboratory for studying how quickly civilized institutions could be corrupted by proximity to barbarism. The Wehrmacht was discovering that you can't preserve honor while enabling dishonor, maintain professionalism while serving political fanaticism, or protect moral integrity while participating in moral collapse. Some officers tried to find middle ground through selective cooperation. They would follow SS directives that seemed militarily justified while finding excuses to avoid participating in obvious atrocities. General Heinz Guderian, commanding the 2nd Panzer Army, perfected this approach. His forces would provide SS units with tactical support for operations against Soviet military targets, while discovering insurmountable logistical obstacles whenever SS forces requested assistance for civilian elimination operations. Wehrmacht resources must be prioritized for military objectives, Guderian explained when questioned about his selective cooperation. Security operations, while important, cannot take precedence over combat requirements in an active theatre. It was a reasonable position that satisfied neither Wehrmacht traditionalists, who wanted complete separation from SS activities, nor SS leadership that demanded total Wehrmacht compliance with racial policies. But Guderian's compromise approach was becoming impossible to maintain. The SS was escalating their demands for Wehrmacht participation in increasingly obvious war crimes. Each new directive pushed Wehrmacht officers closer to a choice they'd been desperately trying to avoid: full cooperation or open rebellion. The crisis came to a head in January 1942, when Himmler issued his most audacious directive yet. Wehrmacht units would begin providing direct support for SS Einsatzgruppen operations, including perimeter security for mass execution sites. The order landed on Wehrmacht desks like a diplomatic hand grenade. For the first time, professional soldiers were being explicitly ordered to participate in mass murder operations. General Fedor von Bock, commanding Army Group Center, read the directive 3 times before summoning his staff officers. What happened in that meeting would determine whether the Wehrmacht retained any vestige of military honor or became fully complicit in SS genocide. "Gentlemen," Bock began, his voice carefully controlled, "we have received orders that require us to choose between our oaths as German officers and our duties as human beings. The room fell silent. Every officer present understood that they were facing the moment that would define their legacy forever. Major General Hans Oster was the first to speak. "Sir, compliance with these orders would make us accessories to mass murder. Refusal could result in court-martial and execution." Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg leaned forward. "Perhaps the question isn't whether we follow these orders, but whether we remain German officers if we do follow them." It was the fundamental question that had been haunting Wehrmacht leadership since the invasion began. At what point does following orders cease to be military duty and become criminal complicity? General Bock stared at the directive for a long moment before making the decision that would echo through military history. "Gentlemen, this order will be filed and forgotten. Wehrmacht forces will continue focusing on military objectives. Any SS requests for support will be evaluated according to military necessity, not political convenience." It was the closest thing to open rebellion that any Wehrmacht commander had attempted. Bock was gambling his career, his life, and the lives of every officer in the room on the assumption that military competence was still more valuable to Germany than political compliance. His gamble would soon be tested in ways that would determine not just individual fates, but the ultimate outcome of the war itself. Because the SS wasn't going to accept Wehrmacht defiance quietly. Heinrich Himmler was preparing a response that would force every German officer to choose sides in a conflict that had moved far beyond bureaucratic disagreement. The Shadow War was about to become an open war. And when German soldiers started fighting German soldiers, the Third Reich would begin its final descent into the chaos that had been building since 1933. The collision course was set. Two military philosophies, two concepts of honor, two visions of what German service meant, were about to crash into each other with explosive force. What emerged from that collision would determine whether Germany remained a military power or became a cautionary tale about what happens when political fanaticism corrupts professional institutions. The Wehrmacht was about to discover that some choices can't be avoided forever, and when the moment of truth arrived, they would learn whether their commitment to military honor was stronger than their fear of political consequences. That moment was coming sooner than anyone expected, because Heinrich Himmler had already begun planning the final confrontation that would settle the question of who truly controlled German military forces. The answer would shock both organizations and change the course of the war in ways neither side anticipated. February 15th, 1942. Heinrich Himmler stands before a map of occupied Europe in his Berlin headquarters, red pins marking the locations of every Wehrmacht command post from Norway to North Africa. His aide, SS Oberführer Karl Wolf, watches nervously as the Reichsführer SS traces patterns with his finger. "They think they're being clever," Himmler murmurs, his voice carrying the cold precision that had built his empire. "These Wehrmacht generals believe they can resist through bureaucratic games and selective cooperation. They're about to learn what happens when you challenge the SS." What Himmler was planning would make the Night of the Long Knives look like a diplomatic disagreement. Operation Valkyrie, a legitimate Wehrmacht contingency plan for maintaining order during national emergencies, was about to be perverted into the mechanism for SS domination of the entire German military structure. The beauty of Himmler's scheme was its apparent legitimacy. Valkyrie had been designed by Wehrmacht planners as a safeguard against internal rebellion or government collapse. In the wrong hands, it would become the instrument for creating exactly those conditions. But Himmler faced a problem. He needed a pretext dramatic enough to justify activating emergency powers, something that would convince even skeptical Wehrmacht officers that only SS intervention could save Germany from catastrophic collapse. He found that pretext in the most unlikely place, a mental hospital in East Prussia. Dr. Karl Brandt had been treating Wehrmacht officers suffering from what military medicine euphemistically called nervous exhaustion. In reality, these were men whose minds had shattered under the moral strain of enabling SS atrocities while maintaining the fiction of military honor. Captain Ernst Müller had been found wandering behind German lines near Leningrad, muttering incoherently about black uniforms and burning villages. Major Wilhelm Hoffmann had attempted suicide after being ordered to provide security for an SS execution squad. Colonel Franz Weber had suffered a complete psychological breakdown after witnessing Einsatzgruppen operations in Ukraine. These weren't isolated cases. Wehrmacht psychiatric facilities were overflowing with officers whose consciences had finally rebelled against the impossible choices they faced daily. Military doctors were beginning to recognize a pattern that threatened the foundation of German military effectiveness. Dr. Brandt's reports to Wehrmacht medical headquarters painted a terrifying picture. Professional soldiers were suffering psychological casualties at rates comparable to frontline combat troops, despite serving in rear areas. The cause wasn't enemy action. It was moral injury resulting from forced complicity in SS operations. We are witnessing the systematic destruction of military psychology through exposure to activities fundamentally incompatible with professional military ethics. Brandt wrote in his classified assessment, "These officers are experiencing moral trauma that manifests in symptoms identical to severe combat stress." But Dr. Brandt made a fatal error. He sent copies of his report to civilian medical authorities, hoping to document what he viewed as a public health crisis. One of those copies reached SS medical officers, who immediately recognized its explosive potential. Here was scientific evidence that Wehrmacht resistance to SS operations was causing widespread psychological breakdown among German officers. Evidence that could be used to justify the most radical intervention in German military history. SS Oberführer Leonardo Conti, Reich health leader, delivered Brandt's report personally to Himmler's office. His summary was coldly clinical. Reichsführer, this document provides medical justification for emergency intervention in Wehrmacht command structures. These officers are clearly suffering from psychological disorders that compromise their ability to serve the Reich effectively. SS oversight of Wehrmacht operations could be presented as a medical necessity rather than a political action. Himmler read the report with growing excitement. Medical justification was perfect. No one could argue with scientific evidence, especially evidence produced by Wehrmacht doctors themselves. Within days, SS medical officers were conducting psychological evaluations of Wehrmacht commanders throughout occupied Europe. The criteria were predetermined, but the facade of scientific objectivity made the process appear legitimate. General Johannes Blaskowitz, who had previously criticized SS operations in Poland, was declared psychologically unfit for command due to stress-related decision-making impairment. His replacement was SS Oberführer Felix Steiner, who had no traditional military training but absolute loyalty to Himmler's vision. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg found himself under psychiatric evaluation after his unit's suspicious inability to locate civilian targets for SS operations. The diagnosis was swift and damning. Chronic stress reaction manifesting in selective memory dysfunction and compromised operational judgment. The medical purge was brilliantly executed. Wehrmacht officers weren't being punished for political disloyalty. They were being treated for psychological disorders that made them unfit for command responsibilities. Who could argue with medical science? But some Wehrmacht officers recognized the trap and fought back through the only means available to them. If the SS wanted to play medical games, the Wehrmacht would demonstrate superior diagnostic capabilities. General Franz Halder, Chief of the General Staff, commissioned his own psychiatric evaluation of SS leadership. The results were devastating and would have been hilarious if the situation weren't so desperate. Wehrmacht psychiatrists found that SS officers displayed pathological aggression patterns consistent with sociopathic personality disorders. Their diagnostic criteria were impeccable: inability to feel empathy, pleasure derived from causing suffering, complete absence of moral restraint in pursuit of organizational goals. SS leadership exhibits classic symptoms of institutional psychopathy, the Wehrmacht medical report concluded. These individuals demonstrate psychological profiles identical to criminal populations studied in civilian mental health facilities. It was a psychiatric declaration of war. Wehrmacht doctors were officially diagnosing SS leaders as criminally insane, while SS doctors were diagnosing Wehrmacht leaders as mentally incompetent. The battle of competing diagnoses created a surreal situation where both organizations were attempting to have each other's leadership committed to mental institutions. German military effectiveness was being destroyed by a medical arms race that would have seemed absurd if it weren't so deadly serious. Major General Hans Oster, Deputy Chief of Military Intelligence, recognized that this medical warfare was actually a smokescreen for something far more dangerous. While both sides were trading psychiatric evaluations, Himmler was systematically positioning SS officers in key Wehrmacht command positions. The replacements weren't random, they were strategically chosen to control crucial communications, logistics, and operational planning functions. Himmler wasn't just purging unreliable Wehrmacht officers. He was conducting a stealth takeover of the entire German military structure. Colonel Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf, serving with Army Group Center, documented this infiltration in reports that wouldn't be discovered until after the war. SS personnel are being inserted into Wehrmacht headquarters under the guise of medical replacements and liaison officers, Gersdorf wrote in his secret files. These appointments follow patterns suggesting coordinated strategy rather than routine personnel actions. Key communication and supply functions are being transferred to SS control through administrative procedures that avoid formal notification requirements. Gersdorf's analysis was absolutely correct. Himmler was implementing a bloodless coup that would give the SS effective control over Wehrmacht operations without the messy publicity of open confrontation. The infiltration was so subtle that many Wehrmacht officers didn't recognize what was happening until it was too late. They accepted SS liaison officers as unfortunate necessities. They approved SS medical officers as qualified professionals. They allowed SS logistics personnel to assume supply responsibilities as temporary administrative arrangements. Each individual decision seemed reasonable. Collectively, they represented the systematic dismantling of Wehrmacht independence. Captain Fabian von Schlabrendorf was among the first to recognize the true scope of Himmler's strategy. His position in Army Group Center headquarters gave him access to personnel records that revealed the pattern. They're not replacing Wehrmacht officers randomly, Schlabrendorf warned his trusted colleagues. They're targeting specific functions that control information flow, resource allocation, and operational planning. Within months, Wehrmacht commanders will be issuing orders through SS communication networks, supplied by SS logistics systems, and advised by SS planning staff. Schlabrendorf's warning came too late. By spring 1942, SS penetration of Wehrmacht command structures was so complete that resistance had become practically impossible. Wehrmacht officers who attempted to challenge SS authority discovered that their communications were monitored, their supplies were controlled, and their staff positions were filled by SS personnel. The takeover was complete, but it had been accomplished so gradually and through such apparently legitimate channels that even the victims couldn't identify exactly when they'd lost control of their own organization. General Heinz Guderian made this discovery when he attempted to plan an independent panzer operation without SS involvement. His staff informed him that operational planning required coordination with SS liaison officers. His logistics chief reported that supply allocation needed SS approval. His communications officer explained that message transmission was subject to SS security review. Guderian realized with growing horror that he commanded Wehrmacht forces in name only. Real authority had been transferred to SS officers who controlled every aspect of military operations while maintaining the fiction that Wehrmacht commanders remained in charge. "I am a general without an army," Guderian confided to his aide. "My soldiers wear Wehrmacht uniforms, but they follow SS orders transmitted through Wehrmacht communication systems. I have become a ceremonial figure in my own command." The psychological impact was devastating. Wehrmacht officers discovered that their resistance to SS authority had been neutralized not through dramatic confrontation, but through administrative procedure. They had been defeated by filing cabinets and organizational charts, but Himmler's victory contained the seeds of his ultimate downfall. The SS had gained control of Wehrmacht operations, but they had also assumed responsibility for Wehrmacht failures. When German military effectiveness began declining due to SS political interference, the blame would fall on the organization that had insisted on controlling military decisions. The Wehrmacht's incompetent resistance was about to be replaced by SS incompetent dominance. And in war, incompetent dominance is far more destructive than incompetent resistance. German military effectiveness was about to collapse under the weight of SS political priorities that consistently overruled military necessity. The organization that had promised to make Germany stronger through ideological purity was about to demonstrate that political fanaticism is no substitute for professional competence. But that demonstration would cost hundreds of thousands of German lives and ultimately contribute more to Nazi defeat than any Allied strategy. The Wehrmacht-SS conflict was entering its final phase. The phase where the winners would discover that their victory was more catastrophic than any defeat they could have imagined. Because when political warriors replace professional soldiers, armies don't just lose battles, they lose wars. And Heinrich Himmler was about to learn this lesson in the most expensive classroom in human history, the Eastern Front, where military incompetence paid its bills in blood and territorial losses measured in hundreds of miles. July 5, 1943. The largest tank battle in human history is about to begin at Kursk, and SS Oberfuhrer Paul Hauser commands the 2nd SS Panzer Corps at the spearhead of Operation Citadel. His 3 divisions, Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf, represent the cream of SS military capability. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of German panzer warfare, watches from his headquarters as SS tanks roll towards Soviet positions. What should be Germany's supreme military effort has become a test of whether SS ideology can substitute for Wehrmacht professionalism. The results would answer that question definitively. Within hours of the attack's beginning, SS tactical incompetence was creating casualties that shocked even veteran Wehrmacht observers. SS panzer commanders, trained to value aggression over tactical sophistication, were driving their tanks directly into Soviet killing zones that Wehrmacht reconnaissance had identified and marked as impassable. Major Klaus Weber, a Wehrmacht tank commander attached to SS operations as a liaison officer, watched in stunned disbelief as Leibstandarte panzers charged across open ground toward prepared Soviet positions. They're advancing in parade formation, Weber radioed to his superiors. No tactical dispersion, no coordinated artillery support, no reconnaissance of enemy positions. It's not military tactics, it's mechanized suicide. Weber's assessment proved prophetic. Within the first day, SS panzer losses exceeded Wehrmacht estimates for the entire week's operations. Tanks that had taken months to build and train crews to operate were being destroyed in minutes by Soviet anti-tank guns that Wehrmacht planning had identified and mapped for neutralization. The tactical disasters were compounded by SS command decisions that prioritized political objectives over military effectiveness. Instead of concentrating force against Soviet weak points identified by Wehrmacht intelligence, SS commanders were attacking positions that offered maximum propaganda value regardless of strategic importance. SS Oberfuhrer Theodor Eicke, commanding the Totenkopf division, exemplified this approach when he ordered his forces to capture a Soviet village that had no tactical significance but would provide excellent photo opportunities for SS publicity materials. The attack cost Totenkopf 50 tanks and over 1,000 casualties to capture a collection of wooden buildings that were abandoned by Soviet forces as militarily worthless. Wehrmacht observers calculated that the same resources could have achieved breakthrough at 3 different points along the front where Soviet defenses were actually vulnerable. But the most shocking revelation was SS treatment of their own wounded. Wehrmacht medical officers discovered that SS field hospitals were refusing treatment to soldiers whose injuries prevented them from returning to combat within 48 hours. Dr. Heinrich Brenning, a Wehrmacht combat surgeon, filed a report that exposed SS medical policies as systematic murder disguised as military efficiency. SS medical personnel are implementing triage procedures that prioritize political reliability over medical necessity, Brenning wrote. Wounded soldiers who express doubts about operational effectiveness are being classified as unlikely to recover and denied life-saving treatment. Men who could survive with proper medical care are being left to die because SS commanders consider their morale insufficiently reliable. Brenning's report revealed that the SS was literally killing their own soldiers to maintain ideological purity. Wounded men who questioned SS tactics were being murdered by their own medical officers to prevent their defeatist attitudes from spreading to other troops. Wehrmacht medical personnel began secretly treating SS casualties despite orders prohibiting such cooperation. German doctors found themselves protecting SS soldiers from their own officers' medical policies. The moral implications were staggering. Wehrmacht medical staff were violating direct orders to save the lives of men whose organization was systematically destroying German military effectiveness. Captain Ernst Müller, a Wehrmacht medical officer, captured this impossible situation in his diary. "I took an oath to preserve life, but helping SS casualties means enabling an organization that is destroying the German army from within. Yet these are German soldiers, regardless of their uniforms. How do I choose between medical ethics and military necessity when both choices lead to German deaths?" The dilemma was shared by thousands of Wehrmacht personnel who found themselves caught between professional obligations and organizational loyalty. Every act of cooperation with SS forces enabled SS destruction of Wehrmacht effectiveness. Every act of resistance to SS authority weakened German military capabilities. By the battle's end, the tactical results spoke for themselves. Operation Citadel, Germany's last great offensive operation, had failed catastrophically. Soviet forces had not only stopped the German advance, but launched counteroffensives that drove Wehrmacht and SS forces back hundreds of miles. The strategic consequences were even more devastating. Germany had lost irreplaceable panzer forces that could never be rebuilt. More importantly, German military leadership had lost all credibility with their own soldiers. Wehrmacht veterans began openly questioning orders that seemed designed to waste German lives for SS political objectives. SS soldiers started deserting to Wehrmacht units that offered better medical care and more competent leadership. The unity that had made German forces so effective in earlier campaigns was disintegrating under the weight of mutual hatred and competitive incompetence. General Walter Model, commanding the 9th Army, submitted a post-battle report that was read with growing alarm throughout Wehrmacht headquarters. German military effectiveness has been compromised by command structures that prioritize political considerations over tactical necessity, Model wrote. SS operational decisions consistently ignore Wehrmacht intelligence assessments and professional military advice. The result is casualty rates that approach those of World War I trench warfare without achieving comparable territorial gains. Model was reporting the unthinkable. German military superiority, the foundation of Nazi expansion, had been destroyed by Nazi political interference in military operations. But the most damning evidence came from captured Soviet intelligence documents that revealed how completely German internal conflicts had compromised operational security. Soviet intelligence officers had identified Wehrmacht SS coordination failures and were deliberately exploiting them. Red Army commanders were timing their attacks to coincide with periods when German forces were changing command structures or transferring responsibilities between Wehrmacht and SS units. Stalin's forces were winning battles by attacking during Wehrmacht SS disputes over operational authority. German soldiers were dying because their own commanders were too busy fighting each other to coordinate effective defense. The intelligence revelations shocked even hardened Wehrmacht officers. Their resistance to SS authority wasn't just undermining German military effectiveness. It was actively contributing to German defeat by providing Soviet forces with exploitable weaknesses. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, serving on Army Group South Staff, summarized the situation in a classified memorandum that would later become evidence at his court-martial. Wehrmacht SS conflicts have created systematic vulnerabilities that enemy forces are exploiting with increasing effectiveness, Stauffenberg wrote. German tactical superiority is being negated by command structures that cannot achieve basic coordination between supposedly allied forces. We are losing battles not because Soviet forces are superior, but because German forces cannot cooperate effectively enough to implement coordinated operations. The memorandum was intercepted by SS security officers and used as evidence of Wehrmacht defeatism. Stauffenberg was charged with undermining German military morale through pessimistic assessments of operational capabilities. His trial became a microcosm of Wehrmacht-SS conflict. The prosecution argued that questioning SS effectiveness was equivalent to treason. The defense maintained that accurate military assessment was essential to German victory. Both sides were correct, which made resolution impossible. Accurate assessment of German military capabilities necessarily included recognition that Wehrmacht-SS conflicts were destroying operational effectiveness, but acknowledging those conflicts publicly would further undermine the unity necessary for military success. Stauffenberg was convicted and sentenced to transfer to administrative duties, effectively ending his military career. His crime wasn't military incompetence or cowardice. It was professional honesty about German military weaknesses. The trial established a precedent that would haunt Wehrmacht officers for the remainder of the war. Telling the truth about German military problems was now legally defined as treason. Officers who identified operational weaknesses faced court-martial for defeatism. The policy created a feedback loop of institutional blindness. Wehrmacht commanders stopped reporting problems that might implicate SS performance. SS commanders stopped acknowledging failures that might suggest Wehrmacht criticism was justified. German military leadership became systematically incapable of recognizing or addressing the very conflicts that were destroying German military effectiveness. The results were predictable and catastrophic. Military problems that could have been solved through professional analysis and organizational adjustment were instead allowed to fester until they became strategic disasters. By autumn 1943, Wehrmacht-SS cooperation existed only in official reports and propaganda materials. In operational reality, two German military organizations were waging separate wars according to incompatible objectives, using mutually exclusive methods. The Wehrmacht was trying to fight a conventional military campaign designed to achieve territorial and political objectives through professional military means. The SS was conducting an ideological crusade designed to achieve racial and political objectives through any means necessary. The collision between these approaches was destroying German military capabilities faster than Soviet counter-offensives. Germany was losing the war through internal conflict disguised as external cooperation. Heinrich Himmler's dream of SS domination over Wehrmacht operations had been achieved. The result wasn't German military superiority enhanced by ideological purity. It was German military effectiveness crippled by political interference. The SS had won their war against the Wehrmacht. In the process, they had lost Germany's war against everyone else. But Himmler's victory would prove more Pyrrhic than even his enemies imagined, because while the SS had successfully infiltrated Wehrmacht command structures, they had also inherited responsibility for military failures that were about to cascade across every theatre of operation. The first cracks appeared in North Africa, where Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps had been operating with relative independence from SS interference. When Berlin finally succeeded in assigning SS liaison officers to Rommel's headquarters in late 1943, The results were immediate and catastrophic. SS Sturmbahnführer Werner Ostendorf arrived in Tunisia with orders to coordinate security operations with military objectives. Within weeks, he was demanding that Wehrmacht forces divert resources from fighting the British Eighth Army to hunting down Jewish populations in occupied territories. Rommel's response was characteristically blunt. In a radio message that was intercepted by British intelligence and later broadcast by the BBC, the Desert Fox made his position crystal clear. Wehrmacht forces in North Africa will continue focusing on military objectives. Political activities will not be permitted to compromise tactical effectiveness in an active theatre of operations. It was a public repudiation of SS authority that sent shockwaves through Berlin. Here was Germany's most successful general openly defying SS directives in front of the entire world. Heinrich Himmler's reaction was swift and merciless. Within days, Rommel found himself recalled to Germany for strategic consultations that everyone understood to be disciplinary action. The man who had never lost a major battle was being punished for refusing to lose battles for political reasons. But removing Rommel created a problem nobody had anticipated. The Afrika Korps collapsed within months of his departure. Not because of superior British tactics or overwhelming Allied resources, but because SS officers lacked the military competence to command desert warfare operations. SS Oberführer Kurt Meyer, appointed to coordinate Wehrmacht SS operations in Tunisia, exemplified the problem. His first directive ordered German forces to establish defensive positions on high ground that offered excellent fields of fire for propaganda photographs, but were tactically indefensible against British artillery. Wehrmacht Colonel Hans Ulrich Rudel, a veteran of 3 years desert warfare, tried to explain why Meyer's positions were militarily suicidal. Sir, these positions expose our forces to observed artillery fire from multiple directions. British forward observers will be able to direct accurate fire onto our entire defensive line. We'll be destroyed within hours of contact. Meyer's response revealed the fundamental incompetence that SS political priorities had elevated to military command. Colonel, these positions demonstrate German resolve to defend every meter of Reich territory. Their propaganda value outweighs tactical considerations. Within 48 hours of occupying Meyer's positions, German forces suffered over 2,000 casualties to British artillery that Wehrmacht officers had predicted with mathematical precision. The defensive line collapsed, and Tunisia fell to Allied forces ahead of their most optimistic timetables. British General Bernard Montgomery later admitted that German resistance in North Africa had been so incompetent in the final phase that Allied planners suspected a trap. They couldn't believe that professional German forces would make such elementary tactical mistakes without some hidden strategic purpose. The truth was simpler and more damning. There was no strategic purpose. SS political interference had destroyed German tactical competence so completely that military disasters appeared deliberate. Similar patterns were emerging across every theatre where SS authority had superseded Wehrmacht professionalism. In Italy, SS commanders were ordering attacks on objectives chosen for their symbolic importance rather than strategic value. German forces were dying to capture monasteries and ancient ruins that had no military significance but would look impressive in SS recruitment propaganda. In France, SS security operations were consuming resources needed for Atlantic Wall construction. Wehrmacht engineers who should have been building coastal defences were instead providing logistical support for SS roundups of civilian populations. Most catastrophically, on the Eastern Front, SS racial policies were turning potential allies into implacable enemies. Soviet populations that might have welcomed German forces as liberators from Stalin's oppression were instead experiencing German occupation as an even more brutal form of tyranny. General Heinz Guderian, observing these developments from his position as Inspector General of Armoured Troops, filed a report that would later be considered one of the most prophetic military assessments of the war. SS interference in military operations has reversed every strategic advantage German forces possessed at the war's beginning, Guderian wrote in his classified analysis. Professional competence has been subordinated to political reliability. Tactical flexibility has been replaced by ideological rigidity. Strategic planning has been corrupted by racial considerations that ignore military reality. Guderian's assessment continued with devastating clarity. German forces are no longer fighting to win military victories. They are fighting to implement political policies that make military victory impossible. The Wehrmacht has been transformed from an instrument of national defense into an enabler of SS political objectives that consistently compromise operational effectiveness. But perhaps the most damning evidence of SS military incompetence came from an unexpected source: German soldiers themselves. Wehrmacht units began experiencing unprecedented levels of desertion, not to enemy forces, but from SS-commanded operations to Wehrmacht-commanded positions. German soldiers were literally fleeing their own side to serve under officers they considered militarily competent. Private Wilhelm Hoffmann, who deserted from an SS-commanded unit to rejoin his original Wehrmacht division, explained his decision in testimony that was recorded by military police. "I didn't join the German army to die for SS propaganda photographs," Hoffmann stated. "I joined to serve Germany. When SS officers order attacks that exist only to create heroic images for political magazines, they're not serving Germany, they're serving themselves." Whoa. Hoffmann's sentiment was shared by thousands of German soldiers who found themselves caught between professional military service and SS political theatre. Many chose to risk court-martial rather than participate in operations they considered militarily insane. The desertion crisis forced Wehrmacht commanders to confront an impossible choice: enforce discipline by executing soldiers who refused SS orders, or protect their men by ignoring SS directives. Most chose a middle path that satisfied nobody. They would follow SS orders that seemed militarily rational, while finding excuses to delay or modify orders that seemed obviously suicidal. The result was a command structure so paralyzed by competing loyalties that decisive action became impossible. German forces found themselves immobilized by internal conflicts, while Allied forces advanced on multiple fronts. Major General Hans Krebs, serving as Army Group Center's Chief of Staff, documented this paralysis in reports that painted a picture of systematic military breakdown. German command effectiveness has been compromised by authority structures that require Wehrmacht officers to choose between professional military judgment and political compliance. Krebs wrote, "Officers who follow SS directives risk destroying their units through tactically unsound operations. Officers who resist SS directives risk court-martial for insubordination." Krebs identified the core problem that was destroying German military effectiveness. Wehrmacht officers had been placed in positions where any decision they made would compromise either military effectiveness or political survival. The psychological toll was enormous. Professional soldiers who had dedicated their lives to military competence found themselves forced to choose between competence and survival on a daily basis. Some broke under the strain. Colonel Franz Halder suffered what military doctors diagnosed as command stress syndrome, after months of trying to implement SS directives that violated every principle of military planning he'd learned in 3 decades of service. Others found refuge in alcohol, developing drinking problems that military medicine attributed to operational stress, but which reflected the moral impossibility of their situations. A few found escape through deliberate self-inflicted wounds that would remove them from command positions without requiring them to openly defy SS authority. The German officer corps, once considered the most professional military leadership in the world, was disintegrating under pressures that had nothing to do with enemy action and everything to do with internal political conflicts. By early 1944, Wehrmacht effectiveness had declined so dramatically that Allied intelligence services were revising their invasion plans. Operations that had been considered impossible due to German defensive capabilities were being reclassified as feasible due to Wehrmacht organizational dysfunction. The SS had achieved total dominance over Wehrmacht operations. The price was the destruction of German military capabilities that had taken centuries to develop and could never be rebuilt. Heinrich Himmler's empire was complete. It was also doomed because armies commanded by political fanatics cannot defeat armies commanded by professional soldiers. The D-Day landings would prove this principle with mathematical precision. When Allied forces hit the beaches of Normandy, they would face German defenders whose tactical responses had been compromised by SS political interference to the point where military resistance became largely ineffective. The Wehrmacht's long resistance to SS authority was ending, not in victory or honorable defeat, but in the complete collapse of German military traditions under the weight of political fanaticism. But even as their professional capabilities crumbled, some Wehrmacht officers were planning one final act of resistance. Not bureaucratic obstruction or passive non-compliance, but direct action designed to eliminate the source of German military corruption. The July 20th plot would represent the Wehrmacht's ultimate attempt to save Germany by destroying the regime that had perverted German military service beyond recognition. It would also trigger the final phase of Wehrmacht-SS conflict, where pretenses would be abandoned and two German military organizations would fight each other with the same intensity they had once reserved for external enemies. The shadow war was about to become an open war, and when German soldiers started killing German soldiers in the streets of Berlin, the Third Reich would finally consume itself completely. The stage was set for the most dramatic confrontation in German military history. A confrontation that would determine whether Germany's military traditions could survive the political movement that had claimed to represent them. The answer would come written in German blood on German soil, as Wehrmacht officers discovered that sometimes the greatest enemy wears the same uniform you do. July 20th, 1944. 12:42 p.m. The bomb explodes in Hitler's conference room at the Wolf's Lair, but the Führer survives with minor injuries. What happens next will make Wehrmacht-SS hatred look like a polite disagreement between gentlemen. Within hours, Heinrich Himmler seizes control of the Home Army and declares martial law. But this isn't about suppressing a military coup. This is Himmler's final solution to the Wehrmacht problem. The failed assassination has given him the perfect excuse to eliminate Wehrmacht independence forever. SS Oberführer Ernst Kaltenbrunner coordinates the purge from his Berlin headquarters, working from lists that had been prepared months in advance. These aren't just conspirators being arrested. These are every Wehrmacht officer who had ever questioned SS methods, criticized SS competence, or demonstrated insufficient enthusiasm for SS objectives. The scope is breathtaking. Over 7,000 Wehrmacht personnel arrested in the first week. Not all were involved in the plot. Most had simply committed the crime of being professional soldiers in an organization that now belonged to political fanatics. General Ludwig Beck, former Chief of General Staff, attempts suicide rather than face SS interrogation. His final words to his aide capture the complete moral collapse. "We tried to serve Germany. Instead, we served monsters who destroyed everything German service once represented." But the most shocking discovery comes when SS investigators examine Wehrmacht intelligence files. Hidden in basement archives, they find thousands of documents that expose the true depth of Wehrmacht resistance to SS authority. Every act of sabotage carefully recorded. Every instance of non-cooperation meticulously documented. Every war crime witnessed and catalogued for future prosecution. The Wehrmacht hadn't just been resisting SS authority. They'd been building a legal case against SS leadership that stretched back to 1939. Colonel Hans Oster's files alone contain evidence that could hang 24 SS commanders. Detailed photographs of execution sites. Witness testimonies from Wehrmacht soldiers forced to observe SS atrocities. Financial records showing how Wehrmacht resources had been diverted from military objectives to support SS racial policies. SS Oberführer Walter Schellenberg, head of foreign intelligence, reads through Oster's documentation with growing alarm. His report to Himmler is stark in its implications. Reichsführer, Wehrmacht intelligence has been conducting systematic espionage operations against SS activities since the Polish campaign. They possess evidence of operational methods that could compromise SS leadership in any post-war judicial proceedings. This documentation represents a greater threat to Reich security than enemy intelligence services. Why? The discovery transforms the post-July 20th purge from political retaliation into organizational survival. The SS isn't just eliminating Wehrmacht resistance. They're destroying evidence of their own criminality that Wehrmacht officers had been collecting for 5 years. But some Wehrmacht officers anticipated this moment and took precautions that would haunt the SS long after the war ended. Major Fabian von Schlabrendorf had created multiple copies of his documentation, hidden in locations across occupied Europe. Before his arrest, he managed to transfer crucial files to Swiss banking institutions, with instructions that they be released to Allied authorities if Germany lost the war. Colonel Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf had established contact with resistance networks in France and Italy, providing them with evidence of SS war crimes that could be used to prosecute German war criminals regardless of the war's outcome. General Hans Oster had been secretly photographing SS operational directives and smuggling copies to Swedish diplomatic contacts who forwarded them to British intelligence services. The Wehrmacht's resistance to SS authority had evolved into something unprecedented in military history. A systematic intelligence operation conducted by one German military organization against another German military organization, with the explicit goal of ensuring post-war prosecution of SS leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Henning von Tresckow, before his suicide following the failed coup, sent a final message to his co-conspirators that summarized their ultimate objective. "We have lost the battle for Germany's soul. Our final duty is to ensure that history judges correctly between soldiers and criminals." The SS purge that followed July 20th eliminated over 5,000 Wehrmacht officers through execution, imprisonment, or forced retirement. But it also revealed the extraordinary scope of Wehrmacht documentation efforts that would later provide crucial evidence at Nuremberg trials. Every SS officer executed after the war would die partly because Wehrmacht officers had risked their lives to document SS crimes. The professional soldiers' final act of resistance wasn't military action. It was creating an evidentiary record that would ensure their tormentors faced justice even if Germany itself was destroyed. Heinrich Himmler's victory over Wehrmacht resistance was complete, but it was also Pyrrhic beyond his comprehension. In eliminating Wehrmacht independence, the SS had inherited total responsibility for German military failure. Every subsequent defeat would be attributed to SS leadership rather than Wehrmacht incompetence. More devastatingly, the purge eliminated the last vestiges of military professionalism that had kept German forces effective despite SS political interference. What remained was a military organization commanded entirely by political fanatics whose understanding of warfare had been filtered through ideological requirements rather than tactical reality. The results were immediate and catastrophic. The Normandy defense collapsed within weeks as SS-commanded units implemented defensive strategies based on political symbolism rather than military effectiveness. The Eastern Front disintegrated as SS officers ordered hopeless attacks designed to demonstrate ideological commitment rather than achieve strategic objectives. By autumn 1944, German military effectiveness had declined so dramatically that Allied commanders were revising their estimates of war duration. Conflicts expected to last months were ending in weeks as German resistance proved far weaker than professional military assessment had predicted. The Wehrmacht's destruction by SS political interference had accomplished what no Allied strategy could have achieved: the complete elimination of German military competence through internal political conflict. General Heinz Guderian, one of the few Wehrmacht commanders to survive the post-July 20th purge, documented this collapse in his private papers with devastating clarity. The SS has succeeded in destroying German military effectiveness more completely than any enemy action could have accomplished, Guderian wrote. By eliminating professional military judgment in favor of political reliability, they have created command structures incapable of effective military decision-making. His assessment proved prophetic. Within months, German forces would be retreating on all fronts as SS political priorities consistently overruled military necessity. Units would be destroyed defending positions chosen for symbolic rather than strategic value. Resources would be wasted on operations designed to create propaganda victories rather than military advantages. The final act of Wehrmacht-SS conflict wasn't military confrontation. It was the complete absorption of Wehrmacht professionalism by SS political fanaticism, creating a German military that possessed neither the competence to win battles nor the flexibility to avoid catastrophic defeats. Heinrich Himmler had achieved his ultimate objective: total SS domination of German military affairs. The price was the destruction of German military capabilities that had made Nazi expansion possible in the first place. But the most bitter irony was yet to come. As Germany faced inevitable defeat, Wehrmacht survivors would discover that their years of resistance to SS authority had created the very documentation that would ensure SS war criminals faced justice after the war. The professional soldiers' final victory over their political tormentors wouldn't come on any battlefield. It would come in courtrooms where Wehrmacht evidence would send SS officers to the gallows for crimes that Wehrmacht officers had risked everything to document. The shadow war was ending, not with military victory, but with moral vindication that would outlast both organizations and define how history remembered the difference between soldiers and criminals. The last chapter of Wehrmacht-SS conflict would be written not in German, but in English, French, and Russian, as Allied prosecutors used Wehrmacht documentation to distinguish between professional military service and criminal political fanaticism. In the end, the Wehrmacht's greatest victory over the SS wouldn't preserve German military traditions, but it would ensure that those traditions weren't buried beneath the weight of SS criminality in history's final judgment. The men who had fought to preserve military honor in a dishonorable cause would be remembered as the Germans who helped convict the Germans who had made their cause dishonorable. It was a complex legacy, but it was the only victory left to win. May 8, 1945. 11:01 p.m. The war is officially over, but in a bombed-out cellar in Berlin, two German officers sit across from each other in the flickering candlelight. One wears the grey uniform of the Wehrmacht, the other the black uniform of the SS. Both know they'll likely be dead by morning, either from Soviet bullets or their own hands. But first, they need to settle an account that's been building for 12 years. "You destroyed us," whispers Wehrmacht Colonel Heinrich Müller, his voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. "You turned the German army into your personal execution squad." SS Oberfuhrer Karl Zimmermann looks up from cleaning his pistol. "We made Germany strong. We gave the German people an empire that stretched from the Atlantic to the Volga. And where is that empire now?" Müller gestures toward the ceiling, where Soviet artillery shells are landing closer with each passing hour. "Burned to ash because you couldn't tell the difference between warfare and murder." The two men sit in silence as another shell lands somewhere above them. Dust rains down from the ceiling, coating their uniforms in the grey powder of their dying Reich. "You want to know the truth?" Zimmermann finally speaks, his voice carrying none of the arrogance that once defined SS officers. "We believed our own propaganda. We convinced ourselves that ideology could replace competence, that racial purity could substitute for tactical brilliance." Müller lets out a bitter laugh. 12 years. 12 years we watched you promote mediocrities because they looked Nordic. 12 years we watched you execute prisoners who could have provided intelligence that might have saved German lives. 12 years we enabled your madness because we thought we were serving Germany. And what did your resistance accomplish? Zimmermann's voice hardens. Every report you filed, every operation you sabotaged, every order you delayed, did it save a single life? Did it preserve German honor? Did it prevent this? He waves toward the sound of approaching Soviet voices in the street above. Müller stares at the candle flame, remembering faces of men long dead. Maybe not. But at least we tried to remain soldiers instead of becoming executioners. The sound of boots on rubble grows louder. Both men know their time is running out. History will judge us all, Zimmermann says quietly. But it won't distinguish between the grey uniforms and the black ones. We'll all be Nazis. We'll all be criminals. No, Müller shakes his head. Some of us documented what you did. Some of us preserved evidence. Some of us made sure the world would know the difference between following orders and enjoying the killing. Zimmermann's hand tightens on his pistol. You betrayed your own countrymen. You helped our enemies convict German soldiers. We helped justice convict war criminals, Müller corrects. There's a difference, even if you never understood it. The voices above are speaking Russian now. Both men can hear individual words. The search is methodical, professional. The Red Army has all the time in the world. Do you know what the real tragedy is? Müller continues. We could have won. With proper military leadership, with rational strategic planning, with commanders who understood that wars are won by defeating enemy armies, not by murdering civilians. We had the best soldiers in the world, and you turned them into accomplices to genocide. Zimmermann stands up, checking his ammunition one final time. The weak would always have been eliminated. We just made the process more efficient. Efficient? Müller's voice rises despite the danger. You call losing the war efficient? You call destroying Germany efficient? You call turning the entire world against us efficient? We gave the German people something to believe in. You gave them something to be ashamed of for the next 1,000 years. The footsteps are directly overhead now. Flashlight beams probe through gaps in the rubble. It doesn't matter anymore, Zimmermann says. We're both dead men. The only question is whether we die as soldiers or as cowards. Müller reaches for his own weapon, then stops. No, I won't give you that satisfaction. I won't let you turn our final moment into another SS propaganda scene where we die heroically for the cause. Then what will you do? I'll surrender. I'll face trial. I'll tell them everything I know about what we did and why we did it. I'll make sure history gets the complete story, not just the version that makes us look like tragic heroes. Zimmermann raises his pistol toward Müller. I won't let you betray Germany one final time. Germany is already dead, Müller replies calmly. You killed it when you turned warfare into ideology and ideology into murder. The only thing left is the truth. The cellar door crashes open. Soviet soldiers flood in, weapons raised, shouting in Russian. Zimmermann turns his pistol toward the Soviets, then pauses. In that moment of hesitation, Müller sees something he'd never expected to see in SS eyes. Doubt. Fear. The sudden, terrible realization that maybe, just maybe, the Wehrmacht colonel might be right. The SS officer lowers his weapon. Both Germans raise their hands in surrender. 3 months later, in a prisoner of war camp in Siberia, Heinrich Müller sits across a wooden table from Major William Donovan of American intelligence. Between them lies a stack of documents 6 inches thick, Müller's insurance policy, his final act of resistance against the organization that had corrupted everything he'd sworn to serve. These are Wehrmacht intelligence files on SS war crimes, Müller explains. Names, dates, locations, witness testimonies. Everything we could document without getting ourselves executed. Donovan flips through pages of meticulous records, photographs, sworn statements. Why did you keep all this? Because we knew someday there would be a reckoning. We knew that if Germany lost, someone would have to answer for what was done. We wanted to make sure the right people answered. And Zimmermann committed suicide in his cell last week. Left a note saying he couldn't face the shame of having served criminals while believing he was serving heroes. Donovan closes the file. These documents will help us distinguish between professional soldiers and war criminals at the trials. Muller nods. That's all we ever wanted. To be judged as soldiers, not as Nazis. To be held accountable for military decisions, not for political atrocities we tried to prevent. Years later, as Wehrmacht veterans returned to rebuild a democratic Germany while SS war criminals faced the gallows at Nuremberg, Müller's documentation would prove invaluable. The professional soldiers' final victory over their political tormentors wasn't won on any battlefield. It was won in courtrooms where evidence carefully preserved by Wehrmacht officers helped ensure that justice could distinguish between those who had served their country and those who had perverted it. The Shadow War was over. The Wehrmacht had lost the battle for control of German military policy, but they had won the war for German military honor. History would remember the difference between soldiers and criminals, between following orders and enjoying murder, between serving Germany and serving Heinrich Himmler. In the end, that distinction would prove more valuable than any tactical victory, more lasting than any conquered territory, more important than any strategic objective either side had fought to achieve. The men who had tried to preserve military honor in a dishonorable cause had ensured that their honor would not be buried with their cause. It was the only victory left to win, and perhaps the most important victory of all.